Hello, and thank you for joining us for the 18th episode of Into the Killing. In many of our episodes, we cover cases that the police initially investigated but became stumped. After that, the cases became cold. Years later, thanks to some advancement in technology or the hard work of investigators, the case was finally solved. This case is much different because the police didn't know about the murder until decades after it happened. The case unfolded in a hamlet on Long Island, New York called Jericho. Jericho is a middle upper class community and some famous people have lived there. This includes actor Natalie Portman and pop star Madison Beer. In 1999, it was home to the Cohen family. On September 2nd, the Cohens were moving out of their home. One item in their house was a 55-gallon barrel that was in a crawl space below the house. The family had no idea what was inside the steel drum. It was there when they purchased the house 9 years earlier. They got the barrel out of the crawl space and they set it out with their garbage. But the sanitation workers didn't take away the barrel because it was too heavy. One of the Cohens became curious as to what was in the barrel. So he got a crowbar and he removed the lid. He was immediately struck by a horrendous stench. Undeterred, he looked in the barrel. He saw what looked like a human hand and a woman's shoe. He immediately called the police. At the morgue, investigators discovered that inside the barrel was the mummified remains of a young woman. The barrel was partially filled with a strange greenish-brown liquid. It was described as a jelly-like substance. Also in the barrel were some plastic pellets, a plastic flower stem with leaves, and some jewelry, 2 rings, and a locket. The locket had an inscription that read, "To Patrice, love Uncle Phil." There was also a woman's pocketbook. In the pocketbook, there were some papers and an address book. But since they had been soaking in the mysterious liquid, possibly for decades, any writing that was on the paper and the address book was unlegible. The medical examiner determined that the cause of death was blunt force trauma to the head. She had been struck on the back and the top of the head 10 times with a blunt object. The medical examiner never said what the blunt object was. While the medical examiner could determine how the woman died, he could not determine the woman's identity. She did not match any missing persons reports. He believed that she was somewhere between the ages of 20 and 30. She was about 5 feet tall. The medical examiner thought she was Hispanic or white. She had some unusual dental work, which he thought was probably done in South America. He also learned that the woman was near-term pregnant with a boy. The police talked to the people who lived in the home before the Cohens. They said that the barrel was there when they moved in. They never opened the barrel because there were labels on it that indicated that there were chemicals inside. The police learned that in the 1960s, when it was assumed that the woman was killed, the house was owned by a man named Howard B. Elkins. When the body was found, Elkins was living in Boca Raton, Florida. Before they talked to Elkins, the police decided to do some more investigating. The police decided to figure out where the barrel came from. There were some numbers on it, and they learned that it came from a chemical company in Linden, New Jersey. The barrel was manufactured 34 years earlier in 1965. So the police thought that the woman's body had been in the barrel since the mid to late 1960s. Identifying the liquid helped solidify this belief. The liquid was a dye that was used to color the bases of fake trees and plants. The dye stopped being manufactured in 1971. The pellets that were found in the barrel were used to manufacture fake plants and trees. The police thought that this was interesting because one of the items found in the barrel was a fake plant stem. It turned out that, in the 1960s, Howard Elkins was the co-owner of a plastics company in Manhattan that manufactured plastic plants and trees. News of the woman's body in the barrel found in a suburban home made a lot of headlines in the New York area. This led to an anonymous call being made to the police. The caller said that in the 1960s, Howard Elkins had an affair with a Hispanic woman, but the caller didn't know the woman's name. All this information made Elkins a very promising suspect. But at that point in the investigation, the police were no closer to identifying the pregnant woman in the barrel. The papers and the address book were sent to a forensic document examiner. They were dried out in a special cabinet. Then they were reviewed using a video spectral comparator, or VSC. VSC uses a camera and a computer monitor. The document is then hit with a range of infrared lights. VSC is extremely useful in several different ways. For example, if a document has been altered with a different pen, VSC can tell the difference between the two inks even if the pens are the same color. It can also be used to uncover words that have been blotted out with correction fluid. It can also reveal writing that is invisible to the naked eye because it illuminates indentations made by the writing. The writing doesn't even have to be done on paper. For example, investigators in Miami-Dade recovered a phone number written on a murder victim's palm that was invisible to the naked eye. When the document examiner looked at the pages of the address book found in the barrel using a VSE machine, she found some names and phone numbers. The problem was that it was suspected that the woman had been in the barrel for about 3 decades. So the phone numbers were decades old, and the people listed in the address book no longer had those numbers. The police decided that they had enough evidence to question their prime suspect, Howard Elkins. They went to his home in Boca Raton on September 10, 1999, a little more than a week after the body was found. Elkins was uncooperative. Elkins admitted that he had an affair in the 1960s, but he claimed he remembered nothing about the woman. He also refused to give a DNA sample. After a few minutes, he asked the detectives to leave. When the detectives were departing, they told Elkins they would be back with a court order to get his DNA. Shortly after they left, Elkins went out and bought a shotgun and some shotgun shells. He returned home and went over to his neighbor's garage. He got into his neighbor's SUV. Then 7-year-old Howard Elkins shot himself in the head. Elkins' son and the police found him dead. He did not leave a suicide note. A sample of Elkins' DNA was taken. Even though the fetus had been dead for over 3 decades, they were still able to perform a paternity test. It was determined that Elkins was the father. The police concluded that Howard Elkins killed the mother. She was most likely killed because Elkins was married with 3 children and he wanted to keep their love child a secret. But the police were wondering if there was more to the motive than that. There was also a huge question remaining: who was the victim? The document examiner continued to look through the address book for clues to help identify the woman. She discovered that someone had written Mr. Elkins in her address book and a phone number. This discovery completely eliminated any remaining doubt that Elkins was the killer. On another page, the document examiner found a resident alien number. So the police were sure that the woman had immigrated to the United States. They also found the name Kathy Andronde, along with an address and a phone number. Amazingly, Andronde still lived at the same address and had the same phone number. Even more amazing, Andronde knew exactly who the murdered woman was. She was 27-year-old Reyna Angelica Marroquín. Marroquín was born in El Salvador and she immigrated to the United States in August 1966. She moved from El Salvador after divorcing her husband. She left her husband because he was having an affair and his girlfriend became pregnant. First, Marroquín lived in Miami and worked for a short time as a nanny. Then she moved to New York City, where she lived in a Catholic home for single immigrant women. Andronde knew Marroquín because she was a student in her English class in New York. Marroquín managed to get a job at the plastics factory that was owned by Elkins. In November 1968, Marroquín moved out of the shelter. She told Andronde that her boyfriend had gotten her an apartment in Hoboken. Marroquín then told Andronde that she was pregnant with her boyfriend's child, but there was a problem. He was a married man. The man already had 3 children with his wife. Marroquín said that her lover planned on leaving his wife to be with her. But as the months went by, it was clear to Marroquín that her lover wasn't going to leave his wife. So Marroquín did something bold. Marroquín called his wife and told her that she was pregnant with her husband's child. In the spring of 1969, Andronde received a call from Marroquín. Marroquín told Andronde that telling the wife was a terrible mistake. She said that her boyfriend was furious and he told her that he would never forgive her. Even worse, he said he would kill her. The next day, Andronde went over to Marroquín's apartment in Hoboken. She found a rather odd scene. Her door was unlocked and warm food was on the stove. Andronde thought that Marroquín would be back any minute. But she never returned home. Andronde got a bad feeling, so she went to the police station and tried to report her friend missing. But the police told her she couldn't file a missing persons report because she wasn't related to Marroquín. They also said there were no signs of foul play and Marroquín hadn't been missing long enough to be considered a missing person. So no missing persons report was ever filed. Kathy Andronde never knew the identity of Marroquín's boyfriend. But of course, the police had figured that out. With all this information, the police developed a theory about what happened. 40-year-old Howard Elkins somehow convinced 27-year-old Reyna Marroquín, who was 9 months pregnant, to come to his factory. He attacked her from behind with a blunt object, like a hammer or a pipe. After killing his secret lover and the baby she was carrying, he took her body to his home. He then loaded her body into the barrel that contained the dye. At the time of the murder, Elkins owned a boat. So the police thought they planned on dumping the barrel with the body into the ocean. To make sure it sunk, he poured plastic pellets into the barrel. But this actually caused a significant problem. The pellets made the total weight of the barrel 350 pounds. This made the barrel too heavy for Elkins to move onto his boat. so instead he hid the barrel in the crawl space below his house. It's unclear why Elkins didn't move it in the years while he lived there or when his family moved out of the house. Nevertheless, it remained there for 30 years. A reporter for Newsday managed to track down Reyna Marroquín's mother. She said that for 3 decades, she had been having dreams about her daughter. She even had dreams that her daughter was in a barrel. Since Howard Elkins took his own life, no one was ever charged with the murder of Reyna Marroquín. It is not believed that Elkins' wife ever knew about the murder. Thank you so much for listening to this week's episode. As always, our fact checker, producer, and sound designer was Anel Coutier. Follow her on Instagram. A link to her account is in the description box. If you like this episode, please subscribe or follow so you'll miss any future episodes. Next week, we are going to discuss a very bizarre cold case that seems more like a thriller than something that happened in real life. Also, if you just discovered this podcast, please check us out on YouTube. We have over 275 videos featuring some unsettling and bizarre true crime stories. You can find it at youtube.com/criminallylisted. Well, that's all for this week. Thanks again for listening. Please take care of yourself and stay safe.